We're back with Season 6, Episode 7, Newbie Dash. This is the episode in which Rainbow Dash actually joins the Wonderbolts for reals, no really, and becomes a mainline flyer instead of a reservist. And then she immediately gets an embarrassing nickname, which causes her trauma based on her childhood and her low HP with regards to her personal motivation and... not motivation, that's the wrong word. Self-worth, or image in her self-worth. Or confidence, there we go, that's actually what I was going for. Then she dies! And then everyone dies! No, parents! At the beginning of the episode, we see that Scootaloo is still in charge of the Rainbow Dash fan club. Continuity counter. And Rainbow continues to be nice and honest about being a reservist, which also continues her general characterization as someone who is more than willing, and indeed desirous, of trumpeting other people's accomplishments, not just her own. Which is something I've pointed out many times when it comes to Rainbow. Then Spitfire shows up and does a superhero landing. Did you catch that? They even had a special animation for it. And Rainbow's expression when she finds out she has gone from being a reservist into being a full-time Wonderbolt is actually kind of awesome, because she's just got this total shock. And then it just melts into this gigantic grin. It was great. I love it. This also means we have now had 2 of the main 6 who have accomplished, as of this moment, who have actually accomplished their big ambitions. Rarity has made it big. She is already at the point of franchising, as I've already said before, opening up multiple shops, and Rainbow has become a Wonderbolt. Finally, actually become a Wonderbolt. Something that goes back to her very first episode. So that's nice. Twilight, I would say, has not achieved her ambition yet, in my opinion, and I stand by that statement. I don't know if she ever will, because as far as I've seen, she never had. We'll see if she ever does in the seasons that I have not seen. Anywho. Now, first of all, poor Spike. I feel so bad for Spike. I also like the bit where Pinkie Pie is like, alright, tell us everything. Start when you were a foal and knew it was your destiny to become a Wonderbolt. It's like, Pinkie. We don't have time for the full story. This is actually kind of interesting, and probably one of the more logical aspects of the episode is that she was at the very top of the reservists list, despite the fact that she's relatively new to the reservists, all things considered. Now, you could argue that it has been long enough that she just naturally shuffled to the top, which would make perfect sense. I would like to argue that by virtue of her being Rainbow Dash, someone who is a very good flyer, who has done a great many things, and accomplished a great few things, that she was shoved to the top of that list. Because, frankly, that does make sense to me. You could argue whether that's a good or a bad thing, that's a separate debate, but it is the kind of thing that makes perfect sense. She's the better flyer, she's shoved to the top of the list. I mean, you want to get her in there when she's still in her prime, right? This is how sports tends to work, by the way. I also like that she takes a moment to praise Firestreak, the one who's gone off to be a teacher. Again, praising others. So then there's this brief moment, which is probably one of the best moments of characterization of the whole episode, where she starts fretting about whether or not she should wear sunglasses, because she wants to stand out, but she's not really sure she wants to stand out. Maybe she shouldn't stand out. Maybe she should. I don't know. Screw it. I'm just going to go and not wear sunglasses. Another little continuity tidbit, which I'm going to go ahead and add to the continuity counter here. She remembers those little factoids about the Wonderbolts, which makes sense because she had an entire episode about that. And so, in my opinion, yes, S6E07, obviously, since I just mentioned that out loud. So, I want to mention one thing really quick here. Always look both ways before crossing the runway. That's something that I drilled into my niece at a very young age. As in, like, when she was, like, 2 and starting to understand language, it was still something that I was drilling into her. Now, I've been run over by a car, so I admit I actually have a personal investment in this, but it's worth noting that I have seen many circumstances in my personal real life, first person, not secondhand information, not third-hand information, first-hand information, about times when I have nearly been hit by a car or something, a truck. In one case, it was a motorcycle that was zooming by so quickly that there wasn't really any warning. You could always, because that's the trick, right? the argument is, well, if there's nobody here, and they even show this, if you notice the episode does this, she looks to the left, she looks to the right, and she's like, there's nobody here. Why would I check both ways? It's a good habit to be in, is really the answer to that. If you look even when you don't have to, you will look when you do have to because it will become a habit. It's all about building that habit. And again, I do think that's something that people, regardless of age, but especially kids, do need to have built into them, because there are plenty of cases where that driver either isn't paying attention, or is distracted, or is on the phone, or has a bad day, or happens to look away for a millisecond. A car is such a devastating, terrifying weapon. It actually amuses me to think about it, how normalized it's become. That is the wrong song. I mean, it's a good song, but it's not for this episode. Maybe next episode. It is so easy in so little time for a car to become a devastating problem. It's one of the reasons why I tend to be so strict about driving, and one of the reasons why I tend to prefer my own driving to other people's, since I actually trust my driving, because I have had... Well, I'm getting way off topic. The point being, it takes very little for some car to come careening around a corner and hit you. Trust me! It's not fun! So I like that they bothered to sit there and take that moment and say, always check both ways even when there's no one there, just to be in the habit. Now, that being said, we do have another thing to comment on, which I'll get to in a minute, but I just wanted to make that point really quick there. Looking forward. I guess then we have her geeking out a little bit, and then we have her almost immediately, it's like the next scene, she's freaking out, just absolutely emotionally, just which makes perfect sense, because, you know, she's like right now, and she doesn't look both ways, and so nearly gets collided with. Why is there a trash can filled with trash right there? I'm not going to actually poke fun of it. There's actually a comedic rule for that. I don't remember what it's officially called. I've heard several comedians call it different things. It's the law of comedic presentation. Like, something will only show up because it's needed for the gag, and then it'll immediately vanish because of the gag. Like, picture this. Let's say that you ask me about the gag thing, and then I turn, and there's just, all of a sudden, the camera pans over, and there's just a chalkboard here, and I start sketching out the gag on the chalkboard. And so the item only exists within the sake of the gag. And the person's like, you mean like that chalkboard? I'm like, yeah, exactly like this chalkboard. What? So I'm not going to get on about the trash. But what I am going to get on about is several things related to this. So before we go any forward, do you think that her teacher actually laughed at her when she was a filly? Or do you think that's just her memory? Like, that's how she remembers it. We've already seen people, for lack of a better way to put it, misremembering traumatic events from their childhood. We saw that with Fluttershy, just to name one example, so that wouldn't exactly surprise me if that was just the way she perceived it. But on the other hand, we've also seen how teachers are much worse in this series, in several cases, so who knows? If that teacher actually did laugh, though, that teacher needs to be slugged in the face, and then probably fired. Possibly in that order. So, yeah, this is... Rainbow Crash. We've actually heard that before, I'm pretty sure. And it'll be said a lot during this episode. Should I probably go ahead... That's a good point. Flutters didn't laugh, you're right. I should probably mention at this point, while she should have looked both ways, and she was freaking out, which is why she missed it, I still would like to blame the Wonderbolts at least a little bit. And you're probably thinking, why? Well, for the same reason I would blame that car. You're paying attention, right? Like, aren't you watching the road for someone who is directly in front of you? And they weren't exactly coming in quickly, too, if you were paying attention. In fact, they were coming in relatively slowly. They would have had tons of time to see Rainbow in the runway, and tons of time to react, and they did neither. These are the best flyers in Equestria, who can do pinpoint precise high-speed maneuvers, and they just careened towards Rainbow because she was in the wrong of way? What? I'm sorry for hanging on this one point, but it's kind of critical because it's the point of the entire episode. The entire episode hinges on this one point. And while you could argue that Rainbow wasn't paying attention, and you'd be right, they weren't either. So there's another few slugs. By the way, if it's not obvious, I didn't like this episode. No wonder I didn't barely remembered it. Okay, so whatever. They're blind and nearly collide with someone who is directly in front of them as they're relatively slowly coming in for a landing. Sure. And then Rainbow crashes, and they call her Rainbow Crash. And this leads to problem... So they have a couple of personal scenes between them, and this leads to problem number one. Now, problem number one makes sense to me, so I'm completely willing to forgive it. Problem number one is Rainbow doesn't open up about how much this bothers her. That's in character, and frankly, I think most people would do the same thing in her shoes, and that's sake. Because most people, especially when they're already freaked out, already nervous, and already embarrassed, the last thing you want to do is open yourself and be like, oh, I'm sorry, but my feelings were hurt by all these things that you're saying, right? So, naturally, you don't want to, open yourself up for even more humiliation and even more embarrassment, right? So she clams up about it. Okay. This leads to the second problem. This one irritates me substantially more. They take until the very end of the episode to actually talk about the nickname thing. Yes, I know they call him Clipper once in one scene, but other than that, they don't elaborate on the nickname thing until the very end. Now, why does that bother me? I only have secondhand information on this one, but for those of you not aware, hazing is a very big thing in the military and in military-like organizations. It's so common, it is normal. But part of the problem is that they don't hide it, right? They don't try to trick you into thinking they're actually trying to haze you or whatever. They're hazing you. It's like, hey, welcome to the club, welcome to the squad. So we got a thing we got to do. And it's usually right up front and right open and obvious. And everyone knows that because everyone knows that. Yeah, you know you're being hazed. There's actual psychological reasons to do hazing, too. Instead, in this episode, it's not even mentioned. Not even as a passing thing, unless you count the one inference of calling him Clipper. That's it. I don't count Clipper either. Now, again, this tiny little tidbit arguably shouldn't matter in the same way. Except at the same time... Yeah, I mean... I don't know, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just... The episode treats this as if this makes everything okay. And I want to stress it that way, because that's the reason I'm hanging on this point so much. Is by the end of the episode, Rainbow is like, I don't belong in the Wonderbolts. And they're like, yeah, you do. We just haze people. And Rainbow's like, oh, okay. And then it's cool. Like, everything's cool because it was just hazing. And that is the entire point, that is the entire thing that Rainbow is hinging upon. Is that she thinks this is actual mockery, and it's just hazing. Therefore, the fact that it's just hazing probably should have been front-loaded a little bit. Because, and I'll get to this in a second, there's an extremely important, valuable Aesop in here. The episode just barely addresses, and it probably wasn't even intended by the writers, which I'll get to in a minute. It's the next scene. At least they didn't call her Rainbow Trash. But let me hang on this point for one more second. If you ever listened in to conversations between me and Gary and Pax, and you had no information, it was just three random people you've never heard of before talking, you might presume that we all hate each other. Now, you would obviously be wrong, but the point is, we don't actually mean those things we say to each other. It's just, yeah, it's the vitriol. We're buds. You know what that's like. You know what that means. You riff on each other, right? And that's fine. But what Rainbow is going through, this is why I'm kind of with Rainbow on this, from her perspective, is because from her perspective, these people aren't buds who are just riffing on her. They're mean, who are actually being, who are actually making genuine derogatory and negative remarks towards her, which is different. So, what Weoud said here, I actually agree with completely. We should have seen another way they could have fleshed this out if they don't want to front load it. If they don't want to have, like, right at the 8-minute mark, have this whole thing where they explain the nicknames thing and move on, which I would do, by the way. But let's say they don't want to do that. Why don't they just have them in all those little locker scenes and all the scenes where they're flying, just have them rip on each other, right? You know, just the lighthearted, friendly ribbing kind of a thing, as previously indicated. And then a huge amount of my issues from this episode would vanish, because we would now have the demonstrable showcasing of this from the beginning. This would go from an episode about being these people being idiots and having bad communication, which I gave a negative to Nier Automata. I'm not going to be nice about this one. You know, a forced drama plot. It would go from that to being about Rainbow being an outcast. Hey! It's almost like that's what the whole season's been about, right? And if you pay attention, the main 6 lightly rib each other too. Very lightly, admittedly, but they do that semi-periodically. There's been some nice little moments, mostly between AJ and Rarity, for example, ever since season 1 or 2 or whatever that was. So you could just have her feeling like an outcast in this group and not really, you know, getting the gelling in. I'm with Weoud's idea here. This could have been her doing that transition, being someone who's used to being comfortable with the people they're comfortable with, suddenly being shoved into a totally different dynamic, and not knowing how to deal with that. Being awkward or uncomfortable, or maybe not knowing how to riff back, and someone could be looking at her like weird, or them riffing on her and her just taking it too personally, instead of this constant Rainbow Crash thing. This could have been a whole thing. And have her come to grips with that, because that's a good Aesop too, and that's a very common thing. In real life, when you switch groups, either because you've started a new job, or because you're going to a new school, or because you've moved to a new neighborhood, or whatever, we have that moment of shifting groups, and there's that adjustment period. And not everyone deals with that adjustment period very well, do they? Especially when you are someone who is very, like Rainbow is, that she constantly is trying to put herself out there. That she constantly has that need to be the center of attention, right? So it makes perfect sense that she would have trouble adjusting, especially since she's moving up. This is another thing. This is another thing that doesn't get covered a lot in fiction, but is something I've seen happen a lot in real life. How many of you have ever been or known someone who's been good at X? Doesn't matter what it is. Driving, racing, painting, writing, acting, singing. Doesn't matter. You've been really good at it. And then you move up a step, and all of a sudden you're average compared to everyone else at this step. We've actually had an episode about that in MLP with Applejack. You remember, or not Applejack. Oh my god, what's her name? Is it Applejack? Whoops, I forgot to hit enter. There we go. 20 minutes in, I forgot to enter. We had a whole episode about that where she was going to the rodeo, or the pony, not the rodeo, the games. And she just got a bunch of medals, but none of them were first place because she moved up a tier, right? Remember that? I don't remember the name of that episode. Someone's got to know the episode I'm talking about. Everyone in chat's just staring at me awkwardly. That's when I pull out the machine gun. So, point being, this could have been a whole thing. Instead, it's stupid. Which leads me to the next scene. Now, the next scene, this is when the episode really has its best potential, in my opinion. Because I stand by my statement that we should have restructured... Yes, it was, Sean. We should have restructured the episode in the manner that I just talked about. You know, make it so it's shifting groups, and it's going up a tier. And so she's trying to fit in with this new group. And I agree with Weoud's too, the showmanship, or the lack thereof, and the fact that she tries too hard, which is, in my opinion, related to her lack of confidence thing, etc., etc. I think that would be a better restructure of the episode. But let's assume we're stuck with the episode we have. Well, the next scene shows how this could have been a great Aesop. Because we've already seen Rarity, and I brought up the Rarity ambition thing earlier on purpose. We've already seen Rarity succeed at her ambition. And it wasn't quite what she thought it was, but at the same time, she was able to turn that around, figure out who and what she was, and decide to come to a moderate presentation that she was comfortable with. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would like this episode to repeat that episode's Aesop, if I'm being completely blunt. I hate to say that, but it's true. Because this is an important Aesop. Sometimes you really want something. Ambitious-wise, personal desire-wise, whatever. And then you get it, and it's not as good as you thought. That's really what this Aesop is about at its core element. Sometimes you really thought Cyberpunk would be amazing. Or Mass Effect 3, or Dragon Age 2. I mean, we can go back a ways for this, even if we just keep ourselves limited to video games. But this is applicable in real life, too, not just fiction. Sometimes you really want to accomplish X, and then you do! And you're, like, waiting for that moment of awesome, and it's not there. You know what I mean? Some of you, I'm sure, at least know what I mean. I know exactly what this feels like. Now, the catch is... Now, this is purely personal experience on this one, so I can't speak for everyone. The catch is that there's two... Yes, that's true. Twilight went through this, too. There's two sides to this. Side number one. Sometimes it actually is that awesome. Sometimes it's just this amazing thing that is just super amazing and awesome. Those are great moments. Cherish those. The other half of the time, you feel disappointed. Now, in my experience, this turns into a subdivision. We actually have a lot of complexity in this, but let's try to keep these simple and only go down one step. Either this was something you didn't really want all along, which is pretty normal, or it actually is that awesome, it's just not some big thing. Instead, it's more like a, and this is probably a bad word, but it's the only word I could come up with, it's a comfortable thing. So instead of, you know, fireworks and confetti and everything is just this amazing, fantastic thing, instead it's just, it's nice. It's comfy, you know? To use a direct example, romantic relationships. I personally suspect that at least some, especially in the teenage years and early 20s years, relationships tend to fail because the people are sort of expecting the, you know, fireworks, amazing, fantastical, awesome. And they don't have that, and so that tends to cause issues, and that accelerates and builds up, and then we have problems and divorces. But there's nothing wrong with just being with someone romantically that you're just comfortable with. That it's just, you're connected to them, and that's cool. It's the difference between being like, yes! And... you know? Now, I mentioned this because the episode kind of touches on this with regards to Rainbow. She's finally made it. In fact, I wrote down the quote. Where was it? Blah, blah, blah. I'm finally a Wonderbolt, so everything has to be totally, perfectly awesome, is her direct quote. And you see how that ties directly into what I'm talking about. She expected this to be the big, amazing thing. And what the episode could have done, and obviously does not do, is it could have settled on the fact that maybe it's just the fact that you're here, and while it's not a big deal, it's still a good deal, right? I also mention this because managing expectations is something that I feel most human beings need to learn in their lives, to be completely blunt. I don't mean, like, pretend everything's going to be bad, but I do think that expectations lead to a lot of problems in life. Again, in every field, effectively. I could keep talking about that topic for quite a while, but let's go ahead and move on. I've already talked too long of it. We're already at the 23-minute mark, and I'm not even halfway through the episode, which is my point, by the way. This is 9 minutes into this episode, and it has this brilliant Aesop just sitting there, and they completely ignore it. By the way, and S.A. Ross already said it, I love the fact that Fluttershy immediately picks up on something's wrong, and Rarity is the second person to pick up and be like, ooh. And figure out what's going on. And I do love, by the way, this goes back to Weoud's earlier idea. I love the fact that the way Rainbow acts between her friends and the Wonderbolts is completely different. Because of course she does, right? I mean, even though she's worked with the Wonderbolts for some time and knows all of them on a first-name basis, and they her, we, even if we're not doing it deliberately, we present different faces to different people. That's just how we are as human beings. We are social creatures, and we tend to be rather dynamic in that regard, with exceptions, obviously. So, we're up to 2 wasted plots so far, if you're paying attention. So then we get to the impressions section. Now, I hate to use the word cringe, But when I literally am sitting in my chair physically cringing a little bit, I suppose I should go ahead and use that word. Credit where credit is due. Ashley Ball, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, does a great job with this. It is not her fault at all. It is harder than it sounds to do what she did. I've actually talked about this before. Because as an actor, you have to portray another character, right? Now, some actors have range. And what she... okay, let me rewind a second here. I'm sorry for talking this out. I know some people don't really get this, so please forgive me for trying to go into some detail on this. Let's say you have to play a character. So you have to change your mannerisms, your vocal patterns, the way you use your voice, and basically everything you do kind of changes around in order to try and accommodate speaking as this completely different person. And if you're paying attention, I hope you'll notice that even my general mannerisms, as well as the cadence of my tone, the specific vowels I'm sitting on, all sorts of little stuff like that, I'm changing from my normal speech patterns in order to properly indicate what I'm talking about. Now, doing that is a skill in and of itself. Doing that, and then doing that over someone else, is exceptionally hard. Playing a character is much harder to do than it sounds, especially if you are already playing the second character. This is above and beyond because, for those of you who don't know, she already plays Applejack. It is Applejack. God, that's gonna bug me. Hang on. What is your name? It is Applejack. Okay. Sorry, I had one of those moments where a word just seemed weird in my head, and I wasn't sure about the word. Mango. Anyways, so she already plays Applejack. So she had to play Rainbow playing Applejack, and that is very hard to do. And she does an exceptional job of it, I think, because she keeps several of the cadences of Rainbow while effectively doing the Applejack voice. And again, huge props. I very much wonder how many takes it took her, how much effort it took her in order to actually pull that off, because holy crap. So credit where credit is due. Still a weird, awkward, embarrassing scene. Made even worse by the fact that the characters were also awkward and embarrassing. One of the things that really makes, cringe comedy, where I can't think of one, by the way, one of the things that makes this kind of cringe comedy worse, for me personally, is when the characters in character are just as awkwarded by it as we are. It, like, compounds it, when the other characters are just like... So this whole scene, this extended scene, just made me go... Ugh. She does a good Rarity impression, though, I'll give her that. I also like how they change her mane each time, too. And yes, Dynamic Dash, Forthright Philly, Reading Rainboom, my personal favorite of the nicknames, Caramare, and Rainbow Fash. Then this is when she mentions Clipper, by the way. So then we cut to the final bit of the episode, which is actually a large chunk of the episode, where they... And I have very little to say about it. I have only 4 bullet points here. Rarity is, of course, the only one who dresses up. Pinkie Pie is being Pinkie Pie about cotton candy. And this is when I mentioned something. So, I don't know if this is deliberate or not, but I've always thought that the Wonderbolts are at least partially inspired by the Blue Angels. For those of you who don't know who the Blue Angels are, they are a United States Navy flying team who does flight shows, and they're very skilled pilots. But they do these flight shows for fun, for shows. I've actually been to a few Blue Angels shows myself in my life when I was much younger. And they're cool and they're awesome, and 26 of them had died in action. And that's the point I wanted to stick on. By the way, as of when this was counted, which at this point was several years ago, there were 262 total pilots, of which 26 have died in action. Because they're up there flying actual planes, and that is just as dangerous as it sounds, especially when you're doing performance flying, when you're trying to do tricks and doing this kind of thing, and, Yeah, it's a 10% fatality rate. I'm a little surprised it's that low, if I'm being completely blunt. Why am I bringing this up? Because Rainbow here decides to, in the middle of one of these shows... Why does it keep going to Stardew Valley? Oh my god. decides to go ahead and completely interrupt the routine with something she just came up with off the top of her head. What? Then there's the fact that she forces Scootaloo into it. What? And Scootaloo's totally not okay with this, it's worth noting. And, okay, so she decides to do shenanigans. Oh no, you're right. And you are absolutely right, Lord Harrimont. A Pegasus flying isn't even in the same category. I'd say it's 2 tiers, at least, less dangerous than a person flying a plane. But that doesn't change my point at all, you know? This is still incredibly stupid. And I get it, she's wigged out and she's trying... And she even says it when she's talking to Scootaloo, they'll never call me Crash again, and I get that. But at the same time, what? And even when it goes according to plan, she freaks out for reasons that I can't even begin to imagine. And then just has this big, lengthy Looney Tunes kind of thing, and then crashes and says, okay, fine, drum me out of the Wonderbolts. Which, by the way, is our 3rd and final failed potential moment here, if I might be so bold. We've already... Weouds, I'll give him credit for this, came up with the idea that they could have done the whole episode about her shifting groups, the new dynamic. I've already mentioned the idea this could have been the Aesop about expectations, ambitions, and the fulfillments thereof. The 3rd potential they could have done is have her... They could have had this be a much more character-centric episode centered around Rambo being terrified of failure, specifically. How many of you have ever gotten something good in your life? Something long-term, not like a piece of candy, but I mean like a good job, or a good study program, or maybe you've made it into a nice college, or maybe you found a really good friend, or maybe you've found a good group of friends, or a group of people you liked hanging out with, or maybe you've found someone who you really love, who you like actually being with on a romantic level. How many of you have been terrified of losing that? I mean, my point makes itself, doesn't it? And they could have centered the episode around that idea. The idea that Rainbow has made it and is absolutely terrified of the fact that she doesn't want to screw it up. That's just she's just okay. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And the escalation here almost flows naturally because she makes one screw up, which makes her think, "Oh God, I've already screwed up. I've got to try even harder not to screw up," which makes her screw up. "Oh God, I've got to try even harder," which makes her screw up. This could have also been the focus of this episode. And yeah, by the way, as much as I bang on about the fact that Equestria needs a proper military, a fact I stand by the way, or an opinion I stand by. She should be thankful the Wonderbolts are not a proper military, because being drummed out would be one of the lightest possible things they would do to her if she acted out in the middle of a live... Like, this isn't training scenario. This is a live, in front of an audience event that she decided to go out of... Yeah, and shenaniganing on. And Ect mentions that she gets away with this because she's A, the main character, B, saved Equestria multiple times, and C, is friends with the royal rulers. Yeah. This episode kind of sucks, in my opinion. It is the nicest thing I could say about it is that there is good potential that was never actually followed through on. And that's not exactly a big thing. This episode was written by Polsky, who has been all over the place in quality, as we've talked about before. He's actually written 2 blue episodes and several greens. And Dave Rapp, who's brand new. We've never covered him before. So yeah, I'm thinking bare minimum below average. What do you all think? I will give the animation credit, but I mean, that's kind of the norm at this point in Season 6. And she does get credit for the voice acting, as I mentioned earlier. That is much harder to do than it sounds. Yeah, sure. You can also type in exclamation mark MLP. In fact, do me a favor and check the thing, because Nightbot's been screwing up. Exclamation mark MLP in chat. See if it's working. There we go. Looks like it's working. Good. Because, yeah, it's... I don't want to be too unkind to this episode, but at the same time, I kind of do at the same time. Like, this isn't Lamentation material. But I could see this being blue, aka actually bad. And literally the only reason I would be willing to call this not an actually bad episode is because Ashley Ball does a good job with voice acting in her scenes. I don't know, what do y'all think? Teal. I mean, we can add gradients. Wouldn't be the first time. We had to add a new flavor of blue for Princess Spike. If you guys want to go up to green, I'll accept that. I can accept green. Not impressed. Maybe like a low green. So no wonder I barely remembered this one. No, but a trash can got knocked over twice on Falkenstein. Speaking of which, I should update the HUD, because we just added some continuity counters. Because there were continuity counters in this one, so credit on that point. Right there. With that, we'll go ahead and chop off the local recording.